Thank you so much, Elisha, for that heartfelt speech. To end the day off, I would now like to invite our last panelist of social inequality, Tejal Gupta, Ashita Chaturvedi, Ayan Sule, and Alan George, alongside our speaker, Elisha. Thank you.
To start off the panel discussion, what do you guys think?
So starting off with Elisha's point on Sarah Everard, she was murdered and after being kidnapped by a police officer. I'm sure you've all heard the statistic of 97%. It was argued repeatedly, it was all over social media, and there was countless numbers of for and against and people saying it wasn't real. It was real. 97% of over 1,000 women in the UK aged 18 to 24 have experienced some sort of sexual harassment in a public space. 97%. That's of 1,000 women, and that's from 18 to 24. What about all the people younger? What about all the women older? What about all the women that weren't taking part in the study? That was 97%, and it wasn't even all the women in the UK.
So you said that the systemic issues surrounding gender discrimination in the UK, and as we saw after Sarah Everard's murder, there were mass protests, there was an international movement for women to promote women's rights. Now, do you think that protesting is the most effective way to achieve radical change or systematic change in the world that we live in today?
I think protests in general are the #1 way that forces people to listen. It doesn't, when it gets to a massive scale, you can't just block it out and pretend it doesn't exist, because when you're affecting so many people with a protest, like we've seen in America for racial issues or any other protests, it's a way that forces people to listen, and it hurts the richest people, it hurts their pockets. So I think that's a good way that we can start change from the top.
Yeah, I agree. It's really disheartening to see how minorities are treated in our world today. However, as Elisha mentioned in her speech, that the people that can make the biggest difference today is us, the younger generation. And so with how we spread awareness, we give links to donations and charity and just do our part of making a difference no matter where we are in the world. I think that we are taking steps towards making the world more equal for all of us.
I think the rise in social media and the new age of internet also definitely helps with spreading awareness and educating so many people around the world about all the racial discrimination, all the gender inequality happening, because this stuff has always been happening. It was probably even worse before any of us were alive. Only now, the age we live in, the age of the internet, everything's getting recorded and everything's online, which makes it so much easier for us to access all of the information and get everyone angry about all the atrocities that are happening, which causes protests to happen.
So if you look at it both ways, right, social media can be a double-edged sword. Because the thing with Twitter and most of these platforms that are used to drive these voices that strive for progress, the thing is they're mostly restricted to 150 words or 280 words. And if you're talking about something as complex as political systems and inequality, 280 words is not enough to express that change. And what happens with that restriction on Twitter is that we result in name calling. The society results in driving that gap between conservatives and liberals further. The problem with that is we kind of do this name calling thing where they call us, conservatives call liberals something like communists, and we call them racist. Instead, we should be willing to sit down and have an honest conversation about the problems that plague our society today and see it from their point of view. They should see it from our point of view, we see it from their point of view, and that's the only way we'll be able to reach a consensus, because if there's no consensus, if polarization in society is being driven so far apart, then we're not actually achieving progress, but we're just driving that gap between people who disagree with each other. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't think you'd ever be able to reach a consensus or something that makes everyone happy, but it can be done by compromising, and us insulting each other or insulting the other side, the side you don't like, just drives us further apart and throws more walls up, as we're not willing to look at the other sides and not willing to come up with a compromise.
Exactly, and we don't realize how interconnected all of these inequalities, all these problems are. For example, we wouldn't realize that, for example, in production facilities of, for example, fashion and retail and textiles, 68% of production facilities don't maintain gender equality. So now, we might wonder how gender equality equates into the landscape of labor inequality. Well, take for example the country of Bangladesh. There is an overwhelming majority of females working day and night only to earn $3.3 daily. And as Elisha said, the daily average for the rest of the world is 5.5. That's a $1.2 decline, and that's more than enough to make this as big of a problem as anything else.
All right, guys, so she spoke about Bangladeshi workers. I have this social experiment for everyone here. So if you could just pay attention and pull your phones out, right? Feel every single groove, camera bump, and every power outlet there is on your phone. How many sweatshop workers do you think died or went and worked under strenuous conditions to create what you're holding in your hand right now? How many blood, sweat, and tears of little children went into testing the water resistance that you have on your phones? And here's the thing, right? We have the ability to make radical reform. If you see with Apple a few months ago, right, in Coimbatore in India, there was a furor over the treatment of workers, and what happened with that is because there was a public furor, Apple stepped in and took decisive action against their subcontractors who were conducting these actions, right? So it's our voice to rise up. It's our job to rise up and show our voice to tell everyone about this systemic inequality that is there in society, right? If there was no furor, it would have gone unnoticed. So it's always good to speak up against such problems.
You talk about all the disadvantages of sweatshop and the factories and everything, but then if you were to put away your morals for a second and look at the alternative, all those low-skilled workers would either be unemployed or have to turn to something like subsistence farming, which both unemployment and subsistence farming both have larger negative effects long-term, environmentally and economically. So while on the surface the sweatshops might seem monstrous or inhumane for the atrocious working conditions or the child labor or the low pay, would the alternative of unemployment be better?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question, because looking at this whole system of unemployment and of sweatshop laborers in the first place in countries like Bangladesh and India and Ghana, there can be seen patterns of increased job opportunities for people that are living in the rural areas coming to the industrialized areas for work. However, comparing two brutalities and claiming that one of them is better than the other one, it's just not a feasible way, an effective way of running a system. So instead of comparing two states' conditions of poverty and measuring which one has it worse than the other, we should work towards eradicating the whole thing as a whole, doing things like providing literacy to everyone in a country for them to actually understand what's happening to them, and decreasing the demand for these countless sweatshops to make garments in the first place, for them to run, not in this way, and to basically make use of our power as the influential side of this socially unequal spectrum.
See, there's this well-established notion that the social responsibility of a business that should be just to deliver profits to their shareholders. And I would actually disagree with that because, like, often we ignore the path used by these businesses to achieve whatever product they're making, right? We often don't look past price and user experience. But companies should actually be incentivized to prioritize ethics over everything else. There's this company called Ethisphere, it's an NGO, that publishes a list of large businesses that have been largely ethical, right? And these lists, this list of ethical businesses, they tend to progress 14.4% ahead of their large cap counterparts, right? So they're incentivized to take the ethical approach because it directly helps in their profits, because there's an aspect of PR. Hey, look, this company is using ethical means to achieve whatever product they're making. So that's that.
So how would you say something like capitalism and large MNCs, how would that contribute to inequality worldwide?
So like we've been echoing the same things again and again. The workers under most large companies, I'm not saying all, but most large companies, they work under inhumane conditions. They work long, strenuous hours. They deny their wages. And most importantly, they go down this path of depression, and they go down this path where they're not able to give enough back to their family. So the idea behind, I'm not saying capitalism is bad, right? There's good things to it, and then there's bad things to it, right? But it's always good to hold the people, the rich and powerful, accountable for their actions. Like I said earlier with Apple, the furor in India caused them to suspend temporarily their activities and then resume again after they investigated what was happening. So as young people, right, we have the power. We have all these platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and many, many more, right? We should be willing to sit down and have a conversation about many of these things that plague our society today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And adding on to this whole topic of like capitalism and equating it to the concept of social inequality, economic class is the most prominent form of stratification and classification in the world. So something that everyone can make out is if someone's rich and if someone's poor. And in today's world, there's this talk of how the rich are only getting richer and the poor are only getting poorer. And getting to the root of this cause is essential, because if we need a way for the poor to climb up to the ladder, for them to have their voices heard, clearly something in the system is wrong. Clearly something is lacking, due to which only one side of the spectrum is being treated to the bare minimum, to the most tolerable of humanitarian rights that every single human is obligated and has a liberty to invoke but can't.
A good example would be to use the country we're living in right now, the UAE. Last month, I went for my first dose of the COVID vaccine. And the thing was, I was under a roof with people of different economic classes, right? Laborers, CEOs of different nationalities, right? People from all walks of life. And everyone was being treated with the same care, same intensity by the healthcare workers, because in their eyes, we're all equal. We all have the right to that COVID vaccine. We all have the right to that particular means of healthcare. Now you compare that to the situation back home in India, where certain people aren't getting the vaccines, where the poor people are having it harder than the people that are more economically affluent. I don't think that should be the case. If it's something like healthcare, it should be universal for all. Everyone should have the right to get healthcare from their government.
Adding on to Tejol's point of how the system is inherently flawed and corrupt, moving back onto Sarah Everard, just to round up, she was killed and murdered by a police officer, I'm sure you know. Why are women and ethnic minorities, like in America, the police brutality cases are through the roof, Why are people like this being subject to violence by the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe? How are we supposed to be trusted and feel safe in a society when the people who are supposed to be keeping us safe and taking care of us are basically the ones killing us and putting us at the risk?
I think that's the biggest problem is accountability. Everyone feels like they're protected by the law or they have some sort of barrier that prevents them from being held accountable for what they've done or allegedly done. So I think the first and best step that we can all take is holding each other and ourselves accountable for whatever mistakes we do make.
So we encourage you to look at the racist or sexist behavior, even the microaggressions that you display every day, and try to call yourself out on that and just work towards becoming a better person and eventually living in a better society.
To end this panel discussion, we'd like to leave everyone with a thought. Think about the small things you can do to make a much bigger difference towards the social inequality gap and human rights in society right now. Thank you.
And at the same time, try to go out and support your small businesses instead of buying products from companies that tend to treat their workers like Willy Wonka treats Oompa Loompas. Thank you.